Drew, our MVP team of the week, 2 SEC teams. Now we had Florida the week before, Billy Napier, their win against Utah in week 1 of the season. Week 2, Tennessee goes to Pitt, beats a top 20 team in Pat Narduzzi's team. So Tennessee 2-0 right now, feeling really good. But they get the MVP honors, which means we're going to do a deep dive on their class. Right now, Drew, the number 11 class in the country, 7 top 247 commitments, representatives from 9 different states. There is so much to like about Tennessee's class, but I want to get your overarching first impressions of what the Vols are doing.
So when Josh Heupel was hired in Knoxville, I kind of knocked him as a recruiter. He was a guy that I saw firsthand at UCF. I thought he kind of underachieved there, so I didn't have high expectations. 2 cycles in, man, I'm super impressed with what he and his staff have done. I think the fact that they aren't afraid to go into SEC country, more specifically Georgia, the Peach State, and try to get guys, I think that's notable. And they're really kind of building out the defensive side of the ball with defensive coordinator Tim Banks. I like what they did in the 2022 cycle on defense. I like what they got here in 2023. These might not all be blue chip headliners, household names, but these are guys that I think can be part of the 2 deep and make an impact sooner rather than later. So that's what I like about Tennessee. I didn't expect this from Josh Heupel, and they're really recruiting at a level where I think you can remain competitive in the SEC.
Yeah, and for me, Drew, it's more about who they are offensively and what their identity is. And I think Josh Heupel is so aligned with what he wants to do offensively with his personnel. And, earlier over the offseason, I got to see Nico Iamaleava at the Nashville Elite 11 regionals. I kind of came back from that and threw some cold water on Nico being day 1 ready. After watching him as a senior, listen, physically, I do think this is a guy that can come in to Knoxville and be ready to compete for the starting job. I think he's got some things to clean up in terms of taking care of the football. That really wasn't an issue for him last year. I think he had less than 3 interceptions last year at Warren High School. So already he's put it on the ground a couple times this year. Early on in the season, we've seen a little bit more turnovers. I don't think that's a cause for concern, but he's going to have to acclimate to the speed of the game in the SEC, and that would be for any quarterback. But in terms of Nico Iamaleava, I don't think there's a better fit in terms of the offensive scheme than where he's heading into Knoxville and playing with Josh Heupel. A couple of the other guys that stand out, Cam Selden is a guy that they're going to work at running back, receiver, really kind of a hybrid role. I like him. We'll get into a couple of the other playmakers as well. Ethan Davis, Drew, who I know you love out of Collins Hill, is a guy that they can kind of move around in a very similar fashion and is very dynamic. They're still doing some work on the offensive line, but Sham Umarov, a guy that they beat LSU Georgia out of the state of Georgia for, is a guy that we are very high on. So you talk about Tennessee, and obviously there's been a lot of praise heaped on Josh Heupel, the job that he's been able to do, not only offensively, Drew, but you talked about the job that defensive coordinator at Tennessee, Alex Golash, excuse me if I got that name wrong, but has done already on that side of the ball and what you like about it.
Well, Golash, the offensive coordinator, and I think a lot of people don't know this, he actually called plays last season for Tennessee. On defense, it's Tim Banks leading the charge. And Cooper, I think this is a great time to segue into kind of the next exercise, and that's us highlighting some of these guys that we like. And you mentioned Nico Iamaleava. I think me and you each got a pro comp for what we consider our top 5 guys in the class. So why don't we start at the top? The quarterback that most people know because of his NIL deal, Nico Iamaleava. Cooper, I don't know if you watched this game or read about it last week. He threw 2 interceptions. I know you touched on that. One of those picks, it hit his receiver right in the helmet. He threw it so hard, and it just ended up bouncing into the defensive back's hand. So I'm not that worried about it. I love Nico. He's a guy who made my freaks list, one of 2 quarterbacks on there. You look at the frame, NFL measurables. He's 6'6", monster reach, could have played college volleyball if he wanted to. And to me, I see some Marcus Mariota. And if I had to make a pro comp, I see that. I think he's a guy that can beat you with his legs, but he's also really good in the pocket, can spray that football around. And this is what Josh Heupel wants to do on offense. They're going to spread you out and go fast. I was reading today in the Tennessee game notes that they score faster than anyone else in the country in that first quarter. So I think Nico is someone that could step in, maybe not in 2023, but in 2024 after Joe Milton, who is backing up Hendon Hooker this year, once he exhausts his eligibility. I think it's going to transition and set up nicely for the folks in Knoxville, going from Hendon Hooker to Joe Milton and then Nico Iamaleava.
Early Petagna flag before I get started on Nico Iamaleava. Getting the coordinators mixed up. I'm sorry, Tennessee fans who are tuned in. Can't have that. That's on me. But Nico Iamaleava, Drew, I kind of went back and forth on two guys, both guys from Oregon. You picked Marcus Mariota. I went with Justin Herbert. And I think from a talent standpoint, you look at the frame, kind of similar frames, both 6'5" prospects. I think a guy, Justin Herbert, developed as he got to college, a guy who played very small ball out there in the state of Oregon, but a guy that was a very good athlete. When you watch Nico Iamaleava, it's obviously a very eye-popping to see the arm talent. That's what sticks out. But he's also a guy that moves very well in the pocket, similar to how I was talking about Arch Manning, a guy that moves very well. I think that's a part of his game that can be utilized at the next level, and that can continue to be something that Josh Heupel leans on. So Nico Iamaleava, certainly a program-changing talent. We talked about the fit there with Josh Heupel. There's going to be a lot to like with Nico Iamaleava and sky-high expectations. But Drew, let's get to your favorite guy, one of your favorite guys in the class, and a guy we already mentioned. That's Ethan Davis. And the comparison you had for him was Brevin Jordan from the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and he's a bigger version of Brevin Jordan, a guy that I was really familiar with at Miami, a straight pass catcher at tight end. When I look at Ethan Davis, another member of my freaks list, someone that plays basketball, had mid-major SEC hoops offers at one point. I was super excited to see him this season at Collins Hill, but he ended up having to have surgery on his labrum, so he's out. We'll see what that recovery process is like. You think with modern medicine, he should be able to go potentially for spring practices. I know Ryan Callahan of our Tennessee site reported that Ethan Davis is going to enroll early. But to me, when we look at Tennessee's offense and what Alex Golesh and what Josh Heupel did at UCF, they had a tight end that they worked in the slot a lot. Jacob Harris, who is now with the Los Angeles Rams, was a late round draft pick. He's a guy that had over 1,000 yards receiving his final 2 seasons, 50 passes. And I think when I look at Tennessee and what they've done this season, what they did last season, they're missing a tight end. And I think Ethan Davis can be a weapon for them in that receiving game. I don't know how much inline blocking, how attached he will be, but he's a mismatch in the slot. And he's got natural ball skills. So I'm super excited about him. I think you had a similar comp for him, Cooper, on Ethan Davis, or maybe even a better comp if you're a Tennessee fan.
Mine was Evan Ingram. Certainly, I think more Tennessee fans in that SEC footprint would be a little bit more open to that name, and Evan Ingram, and a guy that played his football at Ole Miss in Oxford, but now with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you said it, Drew, you said it very well, but you look at Ethan Davis, a guy that's very dynamic. I think he is a mismatch type of player for Tennessee. You talk about all the weapons that they already have right now, weapons incoming as well. Ethan Davis is probably the guy that's the most dynamic and gives them a lot of flexibility in the passing game. You talked about if there's one drawback on him, I think it's that inline ability, but the upside in the passing game for the Tennessee Volunteers, what they like to do, I think he can give you some run after catch ability as well. He's one of the better 50-50 pass catchers in the class, regardless of position. So I love him, what they're getting. I thought they were very in a really good situation to go on him early. I think that's probably a guy that a couple other schools are probably kind of kicking themselves right now that they would have went on earlier in the process. So Ethan Davis going to Tennessee, one of the headliners of this class. But Drew, another guy from your area and a guy that we like a lot, that is Shamarad Umarov from the state of Georgia. And we talked about him and why that was such a big get for Tennessee and what they're trying to do up front. What are your impressions of him?
Well, Sham, first off, he's not from Georgia. He's from Russia. He was born in Russia, moved here with his family a few years ago. I was a fan, saw him at the Under Armour Atlanta camp actually 2 years ago. Then I saw him again this past winter, spring. And I just watched his senior tape this morning. Man, he is a guy that you like a lot. You're talking about 6'6", almost pushing 6'7", 315 pounds, 82-inch wingspan, 10-inch hands, and a 36.5-inch reach. To me, when you watch him, he's a natural knee bender, super flexible. And I think when I see Tennessee's offense and what they're trying to do, go fast, spread it out, wide splits, he is the ideal fit. I mean, could he be a left tackle? Yeah, sure. Could he be a right tackle? Yep. I think he could potentially be an NFL guard when it's all said and done. But really like Sham, I think that's a big win for the Volunteers in the Peach State. And I talked about them earlier, going into SEC country and winning some battles. I think Sham's a guy that if he was still on the market, plenty of these schools, maybe a Georgia, maybe an LSU, they would circle him. So I like this take. I think he's someone that could be in that starting five. I don't know exactly where, but I think he's got that upside. What about you, Cooper?
Yeah, 6'6", 300 pounds plus. He carries his weight well. He was a guy that kind of reminded me of Caleb Mcgeary, who was a first-round pick of the Atlanta Falcons out of the University of Washington, and a guy that I'm very familiar with. But, we had to play Caleb Mcgeary at left tackle. It was a position he could play in college, but he was more of a right tackle. That's where he is now in Atlanta. And this was a guy with long arms, big hands, very similar to Sham Umarov. I think Sham is probably going to end up on the right side in Knoxville, but a guy that's really, really good in the run game. And once he gets his hands on you, it's over. So this is a really big get. These are the type of linemen that you typically see drafted. And if you're a Tennessee fan, we got a new 24/7 Sports rankings release for the 2023 class coming up in October. Sham Umarov is a guy that I would expect to kind of inch up the board. We like him that much. So we'll keep an eye on Sham Umarov. Going to our next guy here, Chandavian Bradley, top 247 defender, the edge rusher out of the state of Missouri, and a guy that kind of burst onto the scene early for us in the rankings process, multi-sport background, basketball player as well. And Drew, I'll start if you don't mind, but he kind of reminded me of Leonard Floyd. You talk about this long frame, a guy that plays very kind of high off the edge. He's high-waisted, but he bends exceptionally well. Drew, you and I got to see him at the Future 50 in Bradenton, Florida at IMG. And he was a guy to me that right now just needs to develop a secondary pass rush move. I think he is so used to winning with pure speed, quickness, athleticism. Once he does that at the next level, he can become one of the better pass rushers in the SEC conference in college football. But I really like his athletic makeup.
I think that's a great take. He's just got to figure it out, develop a menu of moves, learn how to transition from speed to power. And I'll be honest, Cooper, coming out of the Future 50, I didn't know a ton about Chandavian Bradley. I was like, this guy's got a ways to go. But when I popped on the senior huddle this morning, I was fired up. This is a guy where, I think you can make a case he's like a Greg Rousseau or an AJ Epinesa. If you watch the Buffalo Bills last week on TV, a big, long, can win with that arm bar type of defensive end. But I also see I wrote down Josh Kando as a comparison. I just think he's someone that's going to get in that Tennessee weight room, get to that training table, and he's eventually going to be 260, 270 pounds. I love the basketball stuff. Man, maybe this guy should have been on my freaks list. He's a guy who maybe will be in the notable omissions section at some point down the line or looking back on it. But he also plays some tight end. I don't know if you saw him creating separation there. Now, this is a good get for Tennessee. They got to get better up front with that pass rush, and he has a chance to hit as an elite edge rusher. And who knows, he doesn't need to play 50, 60 snaps, but if you can bring him in passing situations and allow him to apply pressure, I think he's someone that's eventually going to be able to do that.
Tennessee also has Tennessee native Caleb Herring at the edge spot committed as well, a guy that certainly played well throughout his senior season. But Drew, let's stick on the defensive side of the ball, a guy that we've talked a lot about in our rankings process from the state of Louisiana, right there in Baton Rouge at Woodlawn High School. And that's Jordan Matthews, a guy that a lot of people thought was going to Texas, but a long, lengthy corner, a very good athlete, and a guy that kind of reminded me of Eric Stokes a little bit from the University of Georgia, who was a first-round draft pick for the Green Bay Packers, playing well early in his career. And I say that because Eric Stokes had a very dynamic track and field background. And I look at Jordan Matthews as a guy that's a little underdeveloped on the field, but in terms of the athletic makeup and seeing him in person physically, the way he looks ready to play day one in the SEC. I think technically he's going to have to develop at the position. But you take that type of athletic clay and makeup, I think Tennessee's got to be elated that he jumped in the boat. And that's a guy that you want to work with. And I wouldn't be surprised 3 to 4 years from now if that's another guy climbing up the board who hears his name called day one, day two of the NFL draft.
Absolutely. And look, if you're building a defense these days, it starts with the pass rushers, and then you want good guys out on the perimeter. Jordan Matthews, to me, that's a monster win in Baton Rouge. I mean, that's a kid that LSU traditionally gets. Who knows how hard they push. But I love Jordan's ability to drive towards the football. He can fly as well. Second at States in the 200-meter dash. I think he was fourth or fifth in the 100. Everything you're looking for in a cornerback these days. You wrote down, I forgot who you wrote down. I wrote down about Kelvin Joseph, who's also from the Baton Rouge area, now with the Dallas Cowboys. I think there's NFL upside here with Jordan Matthews. That's a great take for them. And the last year they got Christian Harrison as a corner, Rodney Harrison's son. I like what Tim Banks and that staff is doing on defense. I think they're building it the right way, and that's going to allow them to contend in the SEC. Slow down those fast Alabama wide receivers. Slow down the future Texas wide receivers. That's the name of the game, and the roster management on defense, I think, is on point.
So there are your 5 headliners of Tennessee's class, ranked the number 11 class in the country, one of the top classes in the SEC as well. But Drew, now let's kind of turn our attention to some of the names outside of the top 247 and guys that maybe aren't talked about enough on their way to Knoxville. And Drew, I'm going to let you start this one off because we just got off our rankings call and this guy popped up once again, a guy that you like a lot.
Yeah, Jalen Smith, the linebacker out of Grayson, he's off to a monster start here for his senior season. He's got 46 tackles, 3 sacks, an interception, and a forced fumble in 4 games. And we know Grayson plays really good competition there in the Peach State. When I look at Jalen Smith, he's got the instincts. I think that's the word Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting, brought up as well. And it's funny because I had it written down in my notes. I think he can get sideline to sideline. And when you look at his frame, we don't have verified measurements on him, but he's 6'3", he's long, and he can move. This looks like a modern-day off-ball linebacker to me. I think Tennessee is super excited and fired up about him. We'll see where he finishes in the rankings, but that was a nice find for them. Again, in the state of Georgia, in that Atlanta metro, and I know that's something I'm going to keep driving home on this show, but again, I just like what they're doing in SEC country. Coop, who do you got as someone that we aren't talking about enough?
Well, I was kind of torn on this. Ricky Gibson from Hewitt-Trussville in Alabama and Nathan Lee Cox, the receiver out of North Carolina. But I'm going to go with Lee Cox, and a guy that, was kind of called to our attention just about a week ago from our friends over at Go Vols 247 on the message board. And he's had an exceptional senior year. He's a sub-11 guy. He's right around 6'3", a shade under 6'3", but a guy that is very explosive and dynamic in the passing game, kind of gives you that vertical element as well. So I like him. He's smooth, he's sudden, he's still developing as a route runner. I think that's going to be a part of his game, that he's going to have a very natural transition at the next level as he gets exposure to more coaching. But I like him a lot. Talked about Ricky Gibson too. I mean, some of the guys that Tennessee has committed outside of the top 247, very good takes, very good job in the evaluation process from Josh Heupel and company. So Tennessee doing a great job there. But Drew, we're going to go to our friend now, Ryan Callahan, who covers Tennessee football for Go Vols 247, on what some of the biggest needs are for Tennessee as they try to wrap up this year.
Still a lot of needs for Tennessee to address in the 2023 class, mainly along the line of scrimmage. And I would start with the defensive line. 4-star David Hobbs out of Concord, North Carolina, looks like one of Tennessee's more realistic options. Alabama and Georgia are maybe Tennessee's main competition for him right now, but Tennessee's had him on campus a handful of times. We'll get an official visit from him next weekend, so he's a real possibility for the Vols. Tennessee also still trying with Tamarion Parker, the 4-star defensive end and former Penn State commitment. Clemson looks like the Vols' main competition for him. Tennessee will get an official visit from him this fall. The Vols also hoping to get 5-star edge rusher Samuel Mpemba from IMG Academy back on campus this fall. He visited them in June. And also Elijah Davis, one of the nation's top junior college defensive linemen, a guy Tennessee's hoping to get back on campus in the coming months. On the offensive line, Vyson Lang out of Alabama looks like one of Tennessee's best options. Tennessee also offered Caleb Lomu, a 4-star out of Arizona, within the past several weeks, so he's one of the newer names on Tennessee's board that looks like a possibility. Tennessee now interested in adding possibly a fourth cornerback to its class. Smith Snowden, a 4-star out of Utah, a guy Tennessee recently offered and is hoping to host on a visit. There have been some new offers on the defensive line as well. I would expect to see more offers on the offensive line. And then Tennessee's still open to adding some guys at other positions like running back, where Roderick Robinson, the UCLA commitment, is still a Tennessee target. And then Traylon Ray, the 4-star wide receiver out of Tallahassee, Florida, among the other guys Tennessee would like to add at wide receiver. And they still have the option of going after guys like Carnell Tate, the big-time Ohio State commitment, picked Ohio State over Tennessee at the time, but the Vols haven't given up on him and still are in a good position to continue to recruit guys like Tate who are committed to other schools.
Shout out to our guy Ryan Callahan for doing that, working with the Go Vols. 247 does great work over there. And if you're a Tennessee fan and that's the first time that you're hearing that, make sure you go subscribe to their content at Go Vols 247. Make sure you subscribe to the work that we're doing here with 24/7 Sports. But Drew, a lot to unpack there, and I think a very optimistic viewpoint from our guy Ryan, to be fair there. But from the national point of view, when you look at this class, maybe we've talked a lot about the positives, but if there's one part of it that kind of makes you pause a little bit, is there an area that sticks out to you?
Well, I'm going to cheat here because I know what your notes say and my notes say, and then Ryan kind of said it as well. It's that defensive line. How are they going to round this out? And I praised the efforts they've done in Georgia and what they've done on the defensive side of the ball. Last cycle, I really liked Jordan Phillips, who they got out of the Orlando area. It sounded like there was a chance he was going to play as a freshman. Still could. They got Joshua Josephs, a few other guys. But, are they going to keep stacking chips on top of that? And they're going to have some visitors here in the coming weeks. Samuel Mpemba's a guy I look at. Ryan mentioned him. I think Georgia is going to be pretty hard to beat there. Tamarion Parker, a former Penn State commit. I think Clemson's going to be hard to beat there as well. Dalen Hobbs, who an SEC contact billed as a freak to me just a few days ago in a text message. I think Georgia, Alabama, that's going to be hard to watch there. So to me, how do they finish on the D-line over the next few months? Because Cooper, as you know this, you've been on the other side. Everyone all of a sudden, the closer we get to the early signing period, a national signing day, everyone's just trying to find another pass rusher. And sometimes you're not trying to take the second or third guy, it's the fourth or fifth guy in your class. So to me, the defensive line.
Yeah, we didn't mention Tamarion Parker from right here in the state of Alabama, a guy that was a top 50 player, was committed to Penn State, backed off of that shortly after he committed. Tennessee in the mix there, Clemson in the mix there, as well as a couple other programs. But Tamarion Parker is a guy that I like a lot, a guy that I've been very kind of hell-bent on throughout the evaluation process. If you can add him into this class, we talked about the upside that they have already committed at the edge spot. I think TJ Parker is a guy that kind of is the cherry on top for Tennessee. But Drew, why I have you here, you are our expert on everything in the state of Florida. We talked about top 247 receiver Carnell Tate in the past. He is committed to Ohio State in the Buckeyes, but Tennessee was the other team in that recruitment. They're still pursuing him. How do you kind of handicap this for Tennessee? Is there a legitimate shot that they can maybe potentially flip him from Ryan Day and Brian Hartline?
Well, I think it's probably, 95-5 Ohio State to Tennessee. And, we'll see if he visits. I think if Tennessee, the way you get Carnell Tate in this class is you keep winning games. And I start looking ahead to next week when Florida comes to town. That's going to be a monster weekend. Does Carnell Tate sneak up to Knoxville for an unofficial visit? I don't know. But I'm sure his eyes are going to be what's going on in that stadium against Florida, which is not that far away from IMG Academy. So he would be a huge addition for them. And I think if I'm Josh Heupel and Nico Iamaleava, I'm selling to him, hey, this offense is super conducive to wide receivers. They get the ball. Look at what Cedric Tillman has done for Tennessee here over the past few seasons. I think him and Hendon Hooker have connected for a touchdown in 11 straight games or something like that. So that's the angle I'm working. Yeah, Ohio State, they'll get you to the NFL, but we can get you to the NFL as well, and we're going to throw you the football a lot. So that's the thing I'm looking forward. What do they do with Carnell Tate? And if it's not him, is it Traylon Ray, a guy from the Sunshine State that they add at wide receiver, but still some pieces there I think that they can kind of finish up with.
Tennessee looking to round out a very good recruiting class this year, number 11 right now, average ranking per commit 90.42. That is 6th in the SEC. only behind Texas A&M right now, who's placed right in front of them, but they only have 11 commitments. So we'll talk about them in a little bit, but that's a wrap for Tennessee. And before we start our third segment and our 4-minute offense, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel and make sure you give us a like and a comment. Guys, we appreciate all the support lately. It has been great